Hello and welcome to the Transfers podcast, powered by FootballTransfers.com, where we bring you news, insight and analysis on that most important of the least important things, football. I'm Duncan Castles and I'm joined this week by one of South America's most accomplished and entertaining journalists. He's written, filmed and spoken in football for countless media in multiple countries, currently a columnist, analyst and commentator for Wall, Banji Sports and Paramount Plus in Brazil. And we've spent multiple World Cups, European Championships and Confederation Cups travelling and talking football together, and I'm proud to have been able to call him a friend for over, 20 years now. Welcome back to the Transfers podcast, Julio Gomes Filho.
You're getting old, Duncan. It's a great pleasure to be here again, my friend. Thanks for the words. Yeah, let's talk about football.
We're both getting older, but still young at heart when it comes to football. So, on the podcast today, we're going to be assessing the latest wave of South American talent, either coveted by or already on their way, in some cases, to the European leagues. And we're also discussing the growing strength of the Brazilian club game and whether it could be on its way to surpassing some of the Europe's big five leagues. But let's begin with an update on the current transfer window, starting with Manchester United's interest in Portugal left-back Nuno Mendes. He is out of contract at Paris Saint-Germain next summer, has been a starter for the team since signing from Sporting in 2021. On loan initially, and then with a total fee of 45 million euros paid for him, which people consider to be quite a heady fee for a young Portuguese fullback at the time. But I think he's proved his abilities. In fact, if you look at Sky Sports' estimated transfer value for Nuno Mendes, he's 38.9 million at the moment, despite only have 18 months left in his contract. PSG are trying to get him to sign a new deal, but have been struggling badly with that. My understanding is that Mendes' agent is asking for a salary of over 10 million euros net for him to stay at PSG. In that context, Manchester United have looked at the possibility of signing Mendes. He obviously plays in a position where Manchester United are particularly short with Ruben Amorim's arrival as coach. Amorim's system is dependent, has always been successful with high energy attacking wing backs. On the left, he has basically inherited a situation where he has two players who spend most of their time being injured, and Luke Shaw and Tyrell Malacia. Shaw in particular has been injured every season that he's been at Manchester United, and has missed at least 53 days of football in all but one of his 11 seasons at Old Trafford. Amorim was the manager who promoted Nuno Mendes to Sporting's first team in 2020, and has another strong link to the player in that Mendes shares an agent with Bruno Fernandes, who recently became part of the same agency group as Ruben Amorim's representatives. So there is a direct link and pathway to the player, something that PSG, I'm told, are concerned about. They have not received any offer from Manchester United at this stage, no discussions between the club, but they're well aware of the interest. They will continue to try and negotiate a new deal with Mendes, and they know it's in their favour that Manchester United are highly unlikely to play Champions League football next year. From both sides, I'm told it's unlikely there will be a move this window, but it is a strong factor for the summer. And there's a lot of pressure on PSG from Mendes' side to increase that salary offer and convince him he should remain at the club. Julio, having seen Nuno Mendes play in Champions League and French football, do you see him as a clear improvement and an obvious assistance to that 3-4-3 system that Ruben Amorim has used at Sporting and it has been struggling to implement since arriving as Manchester United coach?
Definitely. I think Nuno Mendes would be an improvement. I like him. I think he's a player that he would suit well what Amorim wants and how Amorim sees football. And I think he's a better player than Shaw and all the options United have. And in fact, Duncan, I think it's becoming easier to take players from PSGs, and it's no more Neymar, Messi, Mbappe. It's no more fun, isn't it? To play for PSG. I mean, you have to play the French league. What the players, they never loved to play in the French league. Not very competitive for PSG, especially. And then all of a sudden, PSG are no longer competitive for Champions League as well. So they are good enough for France, not good enough for Europe. And I think it's probably not a big deal to convince a player to move from France to the Premier League. So I think United have a good chance there. They literally speak the same language, coach and player, and
know each other, those relationships through the agents, and still at a very young age, 22, where it makes economic sense to purchase the player and have the potential for a future transfer down the line, which is something that Manchester United have to consider at present. I think you're right to flag up that the nature of PSG's squad has changed radically. They've shifted towards younger players. They've reduced the salary bill hugely. And they are trying to build a team to win the Champions League from the basis of being in France. But they're still hitting that problem of a lack of relative competition in France, and then having difficulty stepping up for the Champions League games. But they've got these two basically do or die matches coming up in this new expanded Swiss model Champions League. The first of which against Manchester City, where they have to get points if they're going to avoid being knocked out in the group stage of the competition. I think that factors into a deal that is about to be completed, in that Paris Saint-Germain and Napoli's lawyers, I'm told today, are going through the paperwork on the transfer of Kvaratskhelia from Napoli to PSG. Interestingly, this is a deal we talked about last time you were on the podcast in May, in that PSG had made Kvaratskhelia their first their top target for the summer window. And we talked about how Napoli owner Aurelio De Laurentiis was asking for a fee of over 100 million euros, which PSG considered to be overvalued, how the French club had already convinced the player to come in agreeing the outline of salary terms, and they were waiting to see if De Laurentiis would change his position. He didn't. Interesting, at the time I had people saying to me at PSG that they felt De Laurentiis was making a mistake. He was overvaluing the player. He would end up selling him for less money further down the line. And that looks like it's about to come to pass, because the deal they've agreed following Kvaratskelia's direct request to the club that he'd be allowed to leave in January is for 70 million euros straight. No other players involved, although PSG did offer Milan Skriniar in part exchange in that deal. Kvaratskhelia will sign a 4.5-year contract, assuming he passes a medical, with a base salary of 8 million euros net. Having accelerated this deal in this window, he will be available to play in that home tie against Manchester City in the Champions League. And interestingly, although Kvaratskhelia is known for playing off the left in Italy, was Serie A player of the season in his first year at Napoli, winning the Scudetto, scoring 12 goals. PSG see him as a player who can also play in a central position, either as a false nine or as a second striker, something he does for the Georgian national team, and therefore an especially good fit to Luiz Henrique's system, because Henrique has played without a central forward in particular for a lot of this season, which has actually led to Randal Kolo Muani leaving the club. He has agreed a loan deal to Juventus this week. That's a straight loan with no option to buy. Juventus paying a significant loan fee and covering the player's wages. So Kvaratskhelia coming in for PSG. Antonio Conte very angry about that, having to say publicly that I can't chain up someone who wants to leave the club, having gone out of his way to try and do exactly that in the summer with Kvaratskhelia. Napoli now looking for replacements, and one of the options that is being discussed there is Manchester United's Argentine winger Alessandro Garnacho, who has been partially sidelined by Ruben Amorim, left out of the squad on particular match days, although back in more recently. I'm told that intermediaries are trying to engineer a deal for the player. He is one option for Napoli, but from the Italian end, I'm hearing that they're not crazy for him. It's not like it's a be-all and end-all deal for him. They're also looking at the possibility of signing Federico Chiesa back from Liverpool, ideally in a loan deal. Chiesa's made just 4 appearances for Liverpool since joining from Juve in the summer. And I'm told from the Manchester United end that they do not want and do not need to sell him this month unless there was a huge offer from Napoli for the player, which I understand would have to be more than the €50 million fee floated in Italy. Julio, if Napoli decide to go all out for Garnacho and push that transfer fee to a level where Manchester United feel they have to accept it, in that they have to raise cash to invest in players such as Nuno Mendes, do you think Napoli would be getting the better side of that deal, taking Garnacho as a replacement for Kvaratskhelia?
I don't. And Kvaratskhelia is a player who is there, who is in. Well, actually, he didn't play the last 2 matches for Napoli with like one of those. I mean, he's not injured, right? He's simply not playing. So you can see it happening. You can see why Conte is angry. I mean, Napoli won the league 2 years ago, and they have a good chance of winning it again, and which is not the club achieved often in its history, right? So it's Napoli won the Scudetto 3 times only, and they have a huge possibility. And losing Kvaratskhelia is well, it's a big obstacle with, when you think about winning the title, right? And I don't see. I mean, any player who is a starter and who's been playing for the club for so many years, who is loved by the supporters, it's hard to find a replacement, right? Whoever you bring, there's no guarantee that it will work, that the player will fit the same way, and especially when you have a coach like Antonio Conte, who is a very explosive guy, and all of a sudden he hates you when he'll never play again. So I would choose a replacement for Kvaratskhelia more calmly, let's say. I wouldn't go all in for Garnacho. I mean, if it's a market occasion, you see, Manchester United are burning this player because they need money to buy another one, or one of those situations, then it would make sense. But I wouldn't believe Garnacho as a good or a guaranteed replacement for Kvaratskhelia, considering everything the Georgian player did for Napoli during the last years. But yeah, we know the story. It's very unlikely that Kvaratskhelia stays. Napoli will end up selling him, and as they are fighting for the title, they will be kind of desperate after someone. Yeah, maybe they should look at the Brazilian market or the South American market instead of spending so much money.
Just briefly on Garnacho, because he's perceived as being this top talent. Looking at the analytics we have at Sky Sports, he comes through as one of the Premier League's best dribblers and interestingly, one of the best passers in his position immediately after winning the ball, but not really exceptional in any other dimension of the analytics. And his estimated transfer value comes out at 34.4 million euros. So certainly Manchester United are valuing him significantly higher than the number that Sky Sports analytics model comes up with. But you mentioned the possibility of going to South American talents. This is really why I wanted to get you on the podcast today, Julio, and talk about the latest wave of talent coming from South America, in particular from Brazil and Argentina, which have always been two of the great talent factories for the global game. Just a couple of quick statistics. Globally, the nation with the highest number of players in overseas professional leagues is Brazil, with 1,338, according to a 2024 CIES study. Next came France with 1,091, and third Argentina with 995. And in the decade until 2024, the Campeonato Brasileiro and Argentina's Primera Division accumulated net transfer income of 1.47 billion and 1.29 billion respectively. So you can see the degree of investment from primarily the European game in taking players from Argentina and Brazil. In the Premier League in particular, South America has become a far more viable market since the change in Brexit rules and acquisition of young players, which basically treats South American players on the same level as EU players. It's a judgment based on talent, with the occasional wild card option allowed to be taken by Premier League clubs. And there is now this focus on players who are teenagers and just breaking into their club sides in South America. In fact, we have a deal of exactly that type going through at present, in that Manchester City have agreed a fee for the Palmeiras centre-back Vitor Reis, guaranteed fee of 35 million euros, which I believe is the highest fee ever paid to a Brazilian club for a centre-back.
Yes.
He's just 19 years of age and only really broken into the Palmeiras team recently. What can you tell us about Reis, Julio, and whether Manchester City have set up a good deal here?
Well, it's interesting because you mentioned some numbers, and obviously we've always known that Brazil and Argentina are the main factories, as you said, for players, for football players. There's a big debate here in Brazil going on now. I mean, not as big as it should, but it's happening, regarding the way Brazil is forming their players. You see, it's the building of a player is being contested. You see, it's being challenged by so many coaches. Recently, Boto, a Portuguese directive, came to Flamengo, and in his first press conference he said, "Look, Brazil has to forget this thing that is being done in the youth academies of forming players to be sold to Europe, and have to go back to Brazilian roots and change the way players are being literally built." Players are like, you see, here in Brazil, the young men, like 13, 14, 15 years old, they are being modeled as just for foreign market, you see, just for European market. And it's a big debate here, because are we doing the right thing, or maybe it has to do with Brazil not winning anything at all as a national team, right? So Brazil is no longer the scary national team. Everybody would not want to play against and everything. So Brazil now is a national team just like any other. And maybe the reason is because we are not forming players as we used to. And now we see European clubs coming and getting them when they're 16, 17, obviously because of market possibilities, so just to pay less before any kind of explosion. But also they want to make them better players, training in Europe since a young age, which is absurd. I mean, if someone told me that 20 years ago, I would say, "Oh, are you crazy?" I mean, Brazil is a much better place to grow as a player than Europe. But yeah, it's happening. This is how it worked during this century, and Vitor Reis is an example of that. I mean, he arrived in Palmeiras when he was 10, and if European clubs are chasing players when they are 15, 16, 17, so you have to guess that the big Brazilian clubs are doing the same, but with kids who are 9, 10, and 11. So they can get them earlier and form them in the youth academies to be sold, and obviously sell them when they are 16, 17. In the case of Vitor Reis, he's a defender. Obviously, European clubs come to Brazil more often to find talent, pure talent, wingers, strikers, midfielders. But Vitor Reis was formed in the today most successful youth academy in Brazil, which is Palmeiras, and he was built to be an European player. He's good, he's tall, he's calm, he's quick, he's talented. I have information that the Brazilian national team coach and coaches are thinking about calling him for the first time for the Brazil team in one of the qualifiers or friendly matches during 2025. And yes, he has a chance of being a World Cup player next year. He's talented, and he's seen here in Brazil as a future national team player. What I think, Duncan, is that Manchester City is. I think this transfer right now is a big mistake for everyone. I think it would be better for the player to arrive in Manchester during the summer, the beginning of a new season, and not in the middle of a hurricane as Manchester City are living now, right? So, I mean, Guardiola has 2,000 problems to fix before giving any kind of attention to Vitor Reis. He's not going to get there and be a starter from the beginning. There will be some work to do with him, and I think it's a pity that he won't have 6 months to play for Palmeiras, big matches, the FIFA Club World Cup in June, playing against European teams, playing against playing in the big stadiums, in the big stage. You see, I think it's a pity for him, for Palmeiras, and I don't think Manchester City are going to gain a lot bringing him now, unless they are super afraid he will be more expensive in 6 months' time. But you can fix that, right? You can sign him and get him in August. I mean, that would not be the first case.
Which is a pathway they've used for Argentine players in particular in the past, sign and leave them in their clubs to develop. I guess the difference with Hayes is he's old enough to come. We know that Guardiola likes to pick as many centre backs as possible, often using them in full back positions and sometimes in the midfield. And they have an issue in that Kyle Walker is asked to leave the club in this window. And I think Hayes, as a right-footed centre back, there's a possibility he might be used as a right back in some games later in the season. Interestingly, his estimated transfer value is less than a tenth of what Manchester City have agreed to pay for him. They're also bringing another centre-back in, another deal done in the last couple of days. Abdulkadir Khusanov, Uzbekistan international, 20-year-old at Lens, for a huge fee of 40 million euros guaranteed, plus 10 million euros of performance-related bonuses. Okay, I've been talking to people whose job it is to recruit players in European football, and they've kind of said, if you combine the two players together, you probably have someone who is ready to play for Manchester City now, in that Paez is technically very good, but physically questionable for European football, and in particular for Premier League at this stage. Khusanov, physically very good, and they question whether he'll ever be technically good enough for top level Premier League player, which is interesting. Also, that you have Chiki Bergiriscan working with his successor, Hugo Viana, the sports director on these deals. There's lots of context to all of this, but it does look like a couple of hurried deals, and it does seem, from talking to experts in the domain, that they're using a lot of the extra cash they have available to them to do this deal. Let's go back to Palmeiras quickly. You talked about them being the best talent centre in Brazilian football at present. Obviously, they brought through Endrick, who was signed, I think, as a 16-year-old by Real Madrid, although he couldn't actually move at that stage. And they still have Estevan, Willian, who Chelsea purchased last summer for a fee that could rise to a total of almost 60 million euros. But he's been left at Palmeiras, and I think will stay there until after the Club World Cup.
Exactly.
How has Estevan's development been over the 6 months since we last spoke about him?
Yeah, you see that, well, he's the best player in Brazil right now. I mean, he exploded. He's a big star. I think he's going to be a starter for Brazil in the next World Cup next year, unless he, obviously, 1.5 years in football is an eternity, but so many things can happen, injuries, and Chelsea, who were a big mess last year, and this year they are better. So I don't know how Estevan will fit in the club, in the team next year. But right now, he's the best player in Brazilian football. And it's interesting that they mentioned Palmeiras, because Palmeiras is one of the big clubs in Brazil, one of the most successful clubs in the history of Brazilian football. Palmeiras is a club that basically lived through waves during last century. So they had big teams, and then they remained like 16 years without a title, and then he won it all again, and then another 10 years without a title. And Palmeiras were always known by buying players and not forming players. You see, they had never had a good academy. They had never had a good garden where they grew up players and then used them in the first team. It never happened. It was never the story with Palmeiras. But then 10 years ago, they signed a guy called João Paulo Sampaio. He was a former player for Vitória da Bahia. Normal player, he was not special or anything like that. But then he became the Vitória Youth Academy director. He did a great job there, and Palmeiras brought him 10 years ago. And he is the mastermind behind all that is happening with Palmeiras. Basically, Palmeiras is the most aggressive club in the market when it comes to youth players. They are actually Estevao, for example, Estevan and Endrick, the two most famous ones for the European audience, because they were recently sold to big clubs in Europe. Palmeiras took them when they were 14, and they were already in other clubs. Like, everybody knew Estevan was going to be the next big thing, and then Palmeiras took him from Cruzeiro. And it was, if it was not Palmeiras, it would be another one, because Cruzeiro was a big mess at that particular moment 4 years ago. So Palmeiras are the most aggressive club in the market in Brazil right now. João Paulo is a disruptive guy. For example, he chooses to have one sand pitch, not sand, how can I say that? With no grass, you see, like the old times pitches. Duncan, how would you say that in English?
A gravel pitch or a dirt pitch?
A gravel pitch, perfect. Why? Full of stones. I mean, in a very difficult situation to play, because he says that the young players are becoming too used to playing perfect pitches, and they had to go back. We need to go back in time and let them dribble difficulties, not only the opponents. You see, so once every number of months, he takes the Palmeiras youth teams to play in the favelas in a very rough, tough situation, so they can grow up as men players in a different situation than organized championships, you see. So Palmeiras are doing different things here, and they are very aggressive in the market, and now they are getting the benefit of a 10-year spell working well, you see, in their youth academy. So now they're selling the players. Now they're getting the money back from all this investment made during the years. And Estevan broke up in the first team last year, and he was by far, in my opinion, the best player in the Brazilian league. He's a very, very talented young man. And then we come back to the debate, what I was talking 5 minutes ago. I mean, is it better for Chelsea to get let's say a player that has never played for a first team, that has never played a Palmeiras against Corinthians, a Palmeiras against Flamengo, a Libertadores final, big matches in Brazil, a player who will play well and become a star in the country, or play 2 or 3 bad games and he'll be hammered by the media and by even the supporters. Is it better to get a player who had never lived things like that, but you will do whatever you want to do with him when he's 17, 18? Or is it better to get a player after all that, more experienced and, let's say, ready for the thing, ready for a Champions League, ready for a Premier League match, who is fearless, who is good to go, you see? In my opinion, he has always been the best option to get a player when he has already lived all those things here in Brazil or in Argentina. Because the pressure there is under the players who's here in Brazil, who plays for big clubs here in Brazil, and the national team here in Brazil, is not even compared to what happens in England and Spain and France. I mean, it's much higher here. It's close to unacceptable what happens here in Brazil. You know, they have their car windows broken if they don't play well. It's different. You see, it's a different kind of pressure. And when you get those players good to go and they play regular Premier League game, it's a piece of cake for them. You see, it's much easier. So I think Chelsea are going to get a player who is much more, let's say, he's ready for the big stage. Endrick was not yet. Endrick didn't have the same time in Palmeiras as Estevan had during this year. And if he could have stayed for one more year, it would be perfect. It's not the case, but right now I have to say Chelsea are bringing the best Brazilian player right now. How much Chelsea paid for him? 60 million euros. You said, right?
It can rise to 60 million if all the bonuses are.
Right now, this player is worth 120 million after all he's done in Brazil last year.
I think your comments on Estevan and the bonus of having him experience this are very pertinent. It's interesting that this was actually taken out of Chelsea's hand and that they cannot bring him over to play competitive football. They can't formalise the transfer until he turns 18 years of age. But there's been a lot of criticism of Chelsea's recruitment since their takeover from Roman Abramovich. But I think Estevan in particular is a player where there doesn't seem to be any question from the people I speak to in football that they bought someone who's a superb talent and who they will make money on, assuming he doesn't have a serious injury in his career if they choose to sell him at a later date. In fact, speaking to someone who's viewing footballers I respect incredibly highly, he talked about Estevan being the future of football, and he says he expects him to go head-to-head with Lamine Yamal for the Ballon d'Or in the years to come. And interestingly, they are two very similar players in terms of the position they play. They're both left-footers who prefer to come off the right wing and have a similar style of play.
Yes, they have. And for example, when I was listening and I was thinking about Vinicius Junior, for example, because someone will be saying, "Oh, well, wait, Julio, Real Madrid took Vinicius Junior early, and then they formed him, let's say, and then he became a Ballon d'Or. Well, we didn't win the Ballon d'Or, but he became the best by FIFA, and obviously he became a very decisive player for Real Madrid in the last 2-3 years. But I think, well, what if Vinicius Junior had played for Flamengo for 2 years? It would happen. It would be the same, isn't it? I mean, it would happen the same way. He would be ready earlier, I think. I think Estevan is more complete than Vinicius. Lamine Yamal is a phenomenon, but I see Estevan playing as an 18-year-old player. I see him more complete and taking better decisions than I used to see when Vinicius was 18 or 19. So Estevan is, if he has the minutes, if he has the possibility playing for Chelsea next season regularly and not like 10 minutes here, one game there, League Cup here, and then not playing at all for 3 games for the Premier League, whatever. If he has minutes, if he's regularly playing for Chelsea, he's going to break out in Europeans next season. And yes, I think for the future, he's training to be like an opponent for Lamine Yamal, for chasing the titles. But look, Duncan, I'm kind of different from other Brazilians. I don't care much about the individual prizes. And the year in Brazil is a bigger deal than it should be. Football, we should have learned already that football is a collective thing and not an individual thing. This is one of the reasons why I think Brazilian football hasn't evolved in recent years. We still think it's an individual thing. It's not. It's a collective thing. And those individual prizes, in my opinion, for example, ruined Neymar's career. He's always thinking about being the best himself and not bringing the best of him for the club. It's a culture, you see, and it has to change here in Brazil. And we've been talking about Ballon d'Or rivalries, like in the last years. It would be Haaland against Mbappé, right? And now we are already talking about Estevan and Lamine Yamal. Each time we're changing the next rivalries, right? So let's wait and see. I think both of them has a bright future ahead, but they will have to they will be challenged. in the next years. Obviously, they're going to have 2 or 3 players on them in every game, and they're going to try to find ways to get around it. Let's see how Estevan will do in Europe in his first year. But yeah, as a perspective, I think he's going to be as good as Lamine Yamal, yes.
We should also talk about Kendry Paez, who is another player Chelsea have acquired, who will join in the summer. Has actually been allowed to come and train with them in January. One of many strong Ecuadorian talents at the moment. $20 million in all the transfer, if all bonuses achieved for a player who's 17 at the moment. Debut at 15 years old, youngest ever scorer, youngest ever international for Ecuador, scored in his debut. Superb dribbler, but he's actually seen a different development path to Estevan's in that he's now not being played that often by his team. He has his national team coach saying that he wished he was already out of Ecuador. He's been involved in an incident on national team duty where he visited a New York strip club with a pair of national teammates, which forced the public reprimand from Ecuador, because obviously there's some significant degree under the age limit to go into a strip club in New York. So these things can work both ways, I think, Julio.
Definitely, exactly. Duncan, when have we met for the first time? Probably 2003?
2003,
like that.
I think, yeah.
Exactly. We were like 20-something. You were already crazy. What were we in our lives when we were 16? I mean, these guys are being bought, are being trained, are being considered stars when they are 15, 16 years old. Who is ready for that? Are you are listening to us? Were you ready for that when you were 16 or 15? Who is ready for that? You see, I think it's a miracle that a player who is 17, 18, like Estevan, can work his way around it, around all those things that the paradise brings in front of you, and become a player, you see, and become a real player. Here in Brazil, we are seeing 12-year-old players who have 2 million followers on Instagram.
Mm-hmm.
What the hell is going on? You see, so I completely understand that things are not going well for Kendry Paez. I mean, he's good, he's brilliant, but these guys are being sold and are making too much money too early, and it messes up your head. It's impossible not to happen. It's a miracle when it doesn't happen. You see, it messes up with your head, and then everything you do, you have not only the media, because now the media is the smallest problem. I mean, you have the media and you have 2,000 YouTubers talking about you, and then obviously all the scouts and the coaches and everybody and the family, and everybody's telling you what you have to do. You have to do this, you have to do that. You have to go to England, you have to stay in Ecuador, you have to learn English, you have to not go to a strip club in New York, you have to do that, this, that. It's crazy. I mean, it's crazy. I really hope that whenever Paez has some peace in his life, he will find again his football, because he does have talent. You said the numbers. When I watched him playing for Independiente del Valle for the first time, his club in Ecuador, I was very impressed. In a game against Palmeiras, actually. It was Kendrick against Hendrick, because Hendrick always also played that game. I was very impressed. He's very good, but it's too many things around him. Too many things around him. If I was Ecuador head coach, I would not call him. Ecuador will be in the World Cup. They don't need him. They don't need Kendry Paez to be in the World Cup. So let him take his time. I mean, these guys are too young. We are often saying things about those guys and forgetting who we were when we were 15, 16, 17. Let's take easy with those guys, Duncan.
And this is the problem. It's very hard for the game of football to take it easy on these talents.
Exactly.
There's focus on younger and younger players, and business
and agents and sorry to interrupt you, but agents and clubs and families are not thinking about the lives of those players, right? They're only thinking about the money.
Generally, that can be a problem. I wouldn't say every agent and every family is like that, but it's definitely a factor in many. We'll talk about one of the top talents in Argentina now, Franco Mastantuono. Again, another left-footed winger who can play off the right-hand side, but also he can play as a number 8 or a number 10. He is at River Plate, was his debut at 16 years of age and became River's third youngest ever player. He's had 2 goals, 3 assists and 32 League and Libertadores appearances since then. On the radar, under scrutiny from all of the top European clubs. He has been given a new contract in December by River Plate, which increases his release value to 45 million euros, which interestingly upset Real Madrid, who were already negotiating a potential transfer, and they felt it was disingenuous of River Plate to increase the clause and improve his financial terms when a negotiation was underway. Interesting because River Plate have established themselves as a club who've developed top talents and sold them to Europe, such as Enzo Fernandez, Julian Alvarez, and Claudio Echeverri, who's moving to Manchester City this month after being signed last year. This seems to be another example of that focus of European clubs on these young talents. And the importance to the club and to the players and to the agents of increasing the financial value as quickly as possible.
Exactly. Another example, because Mastantuono in this season he was not a starter for River Plate. He played coming from the bench in a lot of matches in the Argentinian league, Primera División. In Libertadores da América, for example, in the semi-final against Atlético Mineiro, he didn't play the first match. He played half an hour in the second match, but it was the semi-final was already decided because Atlético won the first match 3-0. So he didn't have time to be a star at River Plate, to be important at an important club, and he's already being signed. Or not only signed, but clubs are fighting for him, right? So, yeah, I understand the position of clubs, agents, families. They want the money right here, right now. But for me, again, it would be so much better if a guy like him and others would have more time to flourish in a big club, the center stage here in South America before going to Europe.
River Plate also have a centre forward, Agustin Roberto, who's in a similar position, excelled at FIFA Under-17 World Cup, scoring 8 goals and winning the Golden Boot in 2023. So a name to pay attention to as a potential recruit for European clubs. Let's move back to Brazil, though, Julio. We were talking about, or you mentioned that Napoli might be better off looking in Brazil for a replacement for Kvaratskhelia than going for Garnacho at Manchester United. Let's talk about some of the candidates in Brazil at present, because there's some very strong wide players and forwards who have broken into the Brazilian league in recent seasons. What can you tell us about Rayan at Vasco da Gama?
Rayan's a player he's looking good. He's not having he hasn't had many minutes as a Vasco first player yet. But yes, Vasco is a club, is a big club in Brazil. For example, it's right now the example of a not successful SAF, as we say here, the anonymous societies, but basically clubs are being sold in Brazil. The law changed a couple of years ago, and clubs are being sold, or the football departments are being sold to investors and guys who want to invest in Brazilian football. It's the same thing that happened in England in the beginning of the century. Abramovich being the first one, right, to buy Chelsea. So it's happening in Brazil right now, 20 years later. And Vasco was the example of an unsuccessful purchase. They were bought by a company, 777 Partners, right? They tried to buy an English club as well, if I'm not wrong.
Yeah, tried to buy Everton.
Basically they're not reliable. Vasco took over the operation, but with justice decision here in Brazil, and they are trying to find a new buyer. And so right now, Vasco are, let's say, an easy place to go and grab a player. And Rayan is a talented player. John Textor, who is the owner of Botafogo, among other clubs in Europe, tried to sign him. But as far as I know, the information I have, the player wants to go to Europe because Vasco are expecting to sell him for 15 million euros. Botafogo, via Textor, offered 14, which is quite close. But Vasco don't want to sell the player for a direct rival. Botafogo is a big club from Rio as well as Vasco. And the player wants to go to Europe. So as far as I know, they are touching lots of clubs. You see, they are in contact with. Even United was mentioned. Wolverhampton were mentioned. Bayer Leverkusen, Porto, Benfica, the obvious suspects. They love to buy players here in Brazil and sell them to English football. And but I think Rayan is going to leave in the summer window after playing some matches for Vasco this year and these guys are trying to make his value increase. You see, so he would be a good option for Napoli, but still I would like to see him playing more often for Vasco first team to see if he's as good as everybody says here.
There's an older player, more established player who's also a focus for European clubs, Luiz Henrique, who's been at the champions Botafogo for the past year after having a relatively unsuccessful 18-month spell at Real Betis. He has broken into the Brazil national team in the past season. Regular scorer in both the Campeonato in Brazil and the Copa Libertadores, which Botafogo also won. He's in an interesting position in that he has talked about moving to Olympique Lyonnais, which is John Textor's club in France. But Lyon have just been handed a January transfer ban and provisional relegation by the French authorities with a reported debt of 505 million euros, and Textor saying that they need to overcome a deficit of around 100 million euros before the end of the season, which he says they will achieve. Also understand that there's some question about his the risk that he be handed down a gambling ban. Which has given European clubs concern about getting involved for the asking price of 30 million euros.
Yes, exactly, because he was involved basically in one of those games that Lucas Paquetá was involved as well. Basically, One of the bets, one of the successful bets, were yellow cards for Paquetá and Luiz Henrique in the same day, different matches, different leagues, but there was a relation, and it was not being investigated in England, obviously because Luiz Henrique didn't play for an English club, but it became an investigation in Spain. After UOL, which is the news portal who I also worked for, broke up news that with and not an interview, but quotes from his uncle, kind of giving up the information that people bet on that and we know about it, something like that. So yes, there's an investigation going on in Spain. The thing is, it's so hard to prove those things, right? So I think the main problem with Luiz Henrique is not the investigation one. The problem is that he's not, let's say, the most centered player when we talk about focus and commitment and everything. So he's an explosive guy, and he's not seen by many people as reliable. You see, he played a great season in Botafogo. Great season in Botafogo, for Botafogo. He's actually Estevan's rival for the position, the right wing position in the national team right now. They are fighting for this position. There would be Rafinha in the mix as well, but Rafinha is playing differently in Barcelona and brilliantly. But right now, Estevan and Luiz Henrique are the rivals for being a starter there. And he's a fantastic player. I mean, I think he would be worth a gamble if you think for Napoli, again, using the same example. I think he would be worth a gamble if Napoli could get the right price, considering all the situation regarding Textor and Lyon and Botafogo and the money the American investor need to make in order to put things in order there in France. It could be a name. He's a great player, Duncan. He's a great player, but you need a mentor. Yeah, exactly. He needs a mentor, careful management. You chose better words than I did. He needs someone with him all the time, and someone who he really listens to become a player. To become a reliable player. You see, to have a great player on and off the pitch.
Centre forward at Fluminense, Kaua Elias, 18-year-old contract, interestingly till December 2029 with a €70 million release clause. So Fluminense are doing a Barcelona and setting the targets high on that one. He's been linked with a number of Premier League clubs, Manchester United, Everton and Fulham over the past couple of years. What's your assessment of his level of performance and readiness to move to Europe?
Fluminense has a very good youth academy. They work well there. The thing is, and it's told not openly, but I've heard that from so many agents and coaches, that Fluminense forms great players but not great individuals. I mean, they are not very they're not very disciplined. Yeah, they have a problem with that. And so many players come from the Fluminense. Well, Luiz Henrique is an example. Luiz Henrique came from there. Luiz Henrique came from Fluminense before going to Europe. So they have a problem of lack of discipline, lack of commitment, which contrasts to the great talent and performance that comes out of the Fluminense Youth Academy. So last year, for example, Kaua Elias would play for Fluminense in the Carioca Championship, the state championship, in the first months of the year. Fluminense in 2023 played the Club World Cup against Manchester City in Saudi Arabia. So the first team took, when they came back to work for the preseason, the season was already on in Brazil. So Kaua Elias had the chance to play for the first team, but he didn't. Why? Because of contract problems. Because he didn't want to play, or his agent didn't want him to play before they signed this contract you already mentioned. In fact, he lost 6 months because of that, of playing time, of opportunities. When Nuno Mendes, former Brazil coach, took over Fluminense in the middle of the Brazil season here in Brazilian Championship, he became a starter. Herman Cano, the Argentine, veteran Argentine, was injured. Kaua Elias became a starter, and he played a very good Brazilian league. He's strong. He has a very, he's a scorer. He's the typical scorer. Sometimes you watch him playing, you don't see many things, but then he goes there and bang, you see, he scores. He's a typical scorer. We know that goals cost money in football. You have to pay a lot for players like this, for players who solve problems for you in a difficult match. And I think Kaua Elias has a good chance of succeeding in Europe. I mean, he's a scorer. He's the typical scorer, and he's strong. He uses his body well. I think he's a good prospect.
Let's wrap up this section by mentioning Gabriel Carvalho from Internacional, who was wanted by European clubs but has now signed a deal to go to the Saudi Pro League as one of their underage players. The extra slots the Saudi Pro League has opened up to allow them to add these super talented young players to the 8 overage players that each top tier team is allowed to sign, which all of those slots are filled up. A midfielder who debuted at 16, sold to the Saudis for $60 million with $6 million of bonuses, but just got injured, I believe, and will be out for several months before moving.
Yeah, he got injured in the preparations for the Under-20 South American Cup.
In which we should mention is a major source of talent identification and checking for European clubs. It's where they send their scouts, and there's been some questions over whether that tournament would actually go ahead in Venezuela because of political problems there.
Exactly, perfect. And there are some players who the scouts spot during their lives, but then for a reason or another they are not signed. They keep playing, but they are not chased by European clubs, and then this guy breaks up in the South American Under-20s, and then everybody goes after them, and this is a very common story in South American football, like a player that doesn't develop as expected, but then they just play well in a tournament like that and become the center of attention again. Gabriel Carvalho got injured in the preparation for the tournament, and he will miss like 2 or 3 months. But he's already sold, as you said, to Al Qadsiya from Saudi Arabia. And this is bad news for European football, European clubs, isn't it? Because obviously the Saudi project is not like the Chinese project. It's not going to be over in a year. It's going to last for at least 10 years because they already have the World Cup 2034. Yeah. It's gonna last, and because of the rules, and actually they are thinking about, okay, we already signed some veterans, some stars. Everybody is paying attention to the Saudi League. Now let's sign the 18, 17, 19 years olds to have the future guaranteed, and they have money. we all know that. So if they start signing Brazilian, Argentinian talent when they are 17, 18, 19, it's really bad news for European football. And for the players themselves, I don't know. We have to wait and see, but at least they're not going to strip clubs, are they?
not while they're playing for their new clubs in
They're
Saudi
not
Arabia.
drinking. They're not drinking in the pub in the corner. So yeah, maybe they have good atmosphere for developing in Saudi Arabia. Let's see. Let's wait and see. But it's a pity because Gabriel Carvalho is a very talented player, and it's a pity that we didn't have time to see him playing here in Brazil.
Yeah, and this factor of the Saudi Pro League going head to head for South American talents may have played into two of the earliest transfers of the Premier League January window, in that Bournemouth took Julio Soler, a Paraguayan-born left back from Argentina's Lanús, seen as a potential replacement for Milos Kerkez, who's been agitating for a move away from Bournemouth into a bigger club, and has been a lot of interest of top Premier League clubs such as Liverpool and Manchester United because of his performances in the Premier League, for a substantial fee of about €5 million. And then Manchester United taking a 17-year-old Paraguayan left back, Diego Leon, from Cerro Porteño, guaranteed fee of $4 million, another million of what United describe as easy bonuses, and then a further 3.5 million of difficult bonuses. Interestingly, his estimated transfer value in the Sky Sports system comes out at €100,000 at present. So you can see the degree of cash that's going into taking these very young talents. So we talked about these players who are moving or being targeted in Europe. Let's have a discussion about where Brazilian football is off the back of what was I thought was an interesting discussion in The Economist last month, an article entitled "Brazilian Football Looks Like the Next Premier League," where they were suggesting that your country's top division was on course to compete head-to-head with the English Premier League, not just for talent, but also for eyeballs. Part of that argument was that 4 different Brazilian clubs, Flamengo, Palmeiras, Fluminense and Botafogo, have won the last 6 Copa Libertadores, the South American equivalent of the Champions League, with 4 of those 6 finals being all Brazilian affairs. What do you think of this idea, Julio, that the Campeonato Brasileiro is developing into a league that can go head-to-head with the top European leagues, and maybe this problem of having the young players picked off at 17, 18 is going to go away, and maybe this problem that you mentioned earlier of players being trained specifically to appeal to European clubs could go away off the back of that?
Yeah, there's so many. We need to do another podcast just to talk about this possibility of the Brazilian league becoming a super important league in the world. I think personally it's never going to happen. But definitely the potential is there. I mean, all the things that you need to have a great league internationally are here in Brazil. You have the passion, you have audience, you have a big country, you have history, you have talent, you have culture, you have media, you have everything, right? So we don't have like a septical atmospheres in the stadiums here in Brazil. You have clubs everywhere in Bahia, in Fortaleza, in the south, in Minas Gerais, obviously in São Paulo and Rio, but other parts in Brazil. You have World Cup stadiums. You have 40, 50,000 people watching matches every week, you see. So, and you have big clubs, and you have everything. You have everything in Brazil.
And this new investment into football that you identified.
And now you have money. Exactly. And now you have money because you have the possibility of buying a club and not just investing in a club and leaving the money in the hands of the old directors who basically destroyed And because if you look at what Brazilian football was in the 70s and 80s, it was simply better than European football. Better players, better teams. The first league ever was created in Brazil in 1987, 5 years before the Premier League. But then it was destroyed because those directors, those guys who ruled the clubs over the years, they wanted to make money for themselves, you see. So basically that's the reality. And the clubs were left behind because of bad management, not only within the clubs, but also obviously the federations, the state federations and the Brazilian Federation. So it has always been all about power and money and having the control. And that's why Brazilian football basically stopped in time while Europe developed and became what has become. But the potential, these guys are still here, Duncan. So maybe if Ronaldo becomes the Brazilian FA president, it could happen throughout the year. There are going to be elections, and Ronaldo is one of the candidates. He has like a more modern approach to football, and maybe some some decisions can be taken in order to change how Brazilian football work in general. You see calendar and leagues and everything. So maybe he could potentially bring a revolution to Brazilian football. But it's a big if, right? So I don't know if he's going to win the elections. I don't know if he wants to do those things, and I don't know if he's going to have the power to do those things, you see. So the Brazilian league, for me, will be the eternal what if it was done this way? What if it was, you see, organized in another way? I don't see it happening, but definitely the potential is there. The main problem right now is the calendar. The big clubs play too much, too many leagues, too many championships, too many games, 80, 85, 88 games during the season. So you have big problems regarding injuries and players and travel. Obviously, traveling is a factor here. Brazil is a big country. South America is a big continent. So you basically live in hotels and airplanes, and coaches and players kind of decide to go to Europe also because of that. See, not only the wages, but because of the difficulties that playing in Brazil bring to your life. You see, all those problems are kind of easy to sort, but you need people who want to sort, and it's not happening right now.
So one of the big changes in Brazilian football has been this investment from America, which John Textor has led, and has resulted in Botafogo winning the title in Brazil and the title in South America. The amount of money there is in the US game at the moment, and the appetite to invest in football globally, do you see that as a potential further source of advantage for Brazil in the sense that you could, for example, have an American continental competition with the MLS allying with Argentina and Brazil to produce a kind of South American Super League that would have the financial resource and maybe have the ability to do the kind of organizational restructure that you're talking about, to go head to head?
Yes, but for that to happen, for me, this is the solution, right? If CONMEBOL, the South American FA, join forces with the MLS, with the Americans, leave them to the Americans to organize, to create this product, and then you have America's money and capacity of organizing things with South American tradition, public, audience, culture, players, talent, and everything. So if you put them together, you have a very strong product to compete with the European leagues and the Champions League. Very, very strong. But again, for that to happen, it's people think that the problem would be the Americans to accept it and to put money on that. And I think the problem for me is the South American directives to accept, to leave it, to just leave it. Go away with all the money you made in your life and leave us alone here. Let's do proper football here in the continent. But they will never leave it, Duncan. They will never leave it. And that's why I don't see it happening. For me, the path is very clear. The path is very clear. But they want to play in Miami for the Libertadores final, not to give the Americans all the capacity to organize finances and how this Super League, this America Super League, would work. You see, they want Americans' money, but they don't want the Americans ruling things. So that's why I don't think it's gonna happen. But that would be the most brilliant thing. That would really challenge UEFA and Saudi, and I mean, that would be a super strong product in the market.
Let's finish with the hero and villain section. I'll choose the hero this week, and I'll let you pick a villain. My man of the week goes to Tottenham coach Ange Postecoglou, who hasn't won much recently, but did manage to get an advantage in the League Cup semi-final against Liverpool after a quite questionable decision over what seemed to be a clear yellow card for Lucas Berval, who remained on the pitch and then scored the winner in the game. But he gets the hero award for his comments afterwards, where he criticised recent rule changes in the sport, one of which was the rule that allowed Berval to stay on the pitch. In that moment, he said, "I'm really surprised at how people in this country are so easily letting the game change so much so quickly. It's changed more since VAR has come in than in the past 50 years. That's my belief, that the game is changing on the basis of technology. And I'm saying, why isn't anyone speaking up about it? Especially in this country, who, for all intents and purposes, you guys think you're the custodians of the game. You've got a song that says it's coming home, this is your game, and yet it takes an Aussie from the other side of the world to be the one that's the most conservative about changes." As you'll have heard from the last podcast, I'm not convinced about Postecoglou's coaching techniques and injury prevention techniques in the Premier League, but I think he is spot on when talking about the degree of rule changes we've had in football in the last few years and their detrimental effect on sport. Julio, give me a villain this week.
Oh my God, Duncan, you caught me off guard. A villain this week. Well, I think it's a villain for the month. I think I'll go with Pep Guardiola. And he's being simply unable to fix things in Manchester City and stealing talent from Brazil. I think Pep Guardiola, I don't think he's done. I don't think he's going to be fired. But he's a villain in the sense of, well, come on. He's the best coach ever, isn't it? The best coach as head coach football has ever seen. And he's simply being unable to fix things up in Manchester City. It's a really dumb season for Manchester City. And I will pick Guardiola as the villain.
He's the most successful in terms of trophies accumulated, particularly national titles accumulated. But whether he's the best coach ever, I think, remains to be proven, especially when he has only 2 Champions League to his name as a coach, despite having probably the most talented squad in the history of the game in Barcelona, following that up with a Bayern Munich squad that had just won the Champions League, and then the most expensive squad for most of his time at Manchester City. We'll see how he does in that Club World Cup with Vitor Reis in his squad. Julio, thank you for your time and thank you for your insight. I hope our listeners have enjoyed the conversation as much as I did.
Yeah, the same, Duncan. Thanks for having me. It's always a pleasure to talk to you and your audience. Hope I was able to bring some light to this obscure market, which is the Brazilian market. Everybody talks about Brazil, loves Brazilian football, but nobody knows much about what's going on here, isn't it?
You've been listening to the Transfers podcast powered by FootballTransfers.com. If you like what you heard, please follow and rate us on your favourite platform. Your support helps build a bigger audience and bring you more news, analysis and insight. You can also follow and message us on Instagram, YouTube and Facebook at Transfers Podcast. Our Twitter and Blue Sky address is at TransfersCast. I'm on Twitter, Instagram and Blue Sky at Duncan Castles. Julio is at Julio Gomes Filho. Our production is by Mark Caulfield at Pro Podcast Production, and our music by Mark Caulfield and David L. Stay safe, be well, and thank you for listening.
He did the transfer window. He and McGarry, who left us, it wasn't blown for a couple of years. Duncan was low. Now he's back with a new show. It's called The Transfers. It's where everyone's gonna go. The transfers, the transfers, the transfers. Where everyone's gonna go. Where everyone's gonna go. The transfers, the transfers, the transfers. Where everyone's gonna go. 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 Where everyone's gonna go.